Okay, so again, welcome to this 10th class in the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. Let me go ahead and get us grounded in terms of where we are in the text. We're in this second really large section. It's within conventional bodhicitta and working with overcoming primarily self-cherishing, though as we see in this section of the text, we start talking about both of the twin demons, not just the mind of self-centeredness or self-cherishing, but also the mind of self-grasping. So we're in the section that goes from verses 50 through 90, but starting in verse 55, we have a particular orientation to the verses. I'll go over that in just a moment. But just to recall our memory from the overall chart that I won't put on the screen tonight, but again, there are two main sections to this text: conventional bodhicitta, which are the first 102 verses, and then ultimate bodhicitta, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness within the mind of the bodhisattva. Conventional bodhicitta overcomes self-cherishing by learning to cherish others and develop that mind that we just meditated on, a bodhicitta. That's what we normally call bodhicitta, is conventional bodhicitta. As I said, ultimate bodhicitta is the wisdom realizing emptiness within the mind of a bodhisattva, which is the antidote to the other demon, the demon of self-grasping. So in this section of verses 50 through 90, as it says here, we're requesting Yamantaka, who has both of these aspects embodied in his two legs as well as the two eyes and what have you, that are showing that we need to bring both of these minds, conventional and ultimate bodhicitta, to bear to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping respectively. So let's go on to the format for these verses, which I've introduced before the last two classes or so that we've been going through these verses. The first two lines are going to give us the distorted views, the ways of thinking, behaving, actions, and so on that we have based on the twin demons, primarily self-cherishing, but we can also see how self-grasping is going to be there. As I mentioned previously, these two will often rise together. They aren't in a causal relationship, but nonetheless, most minds of self-cherishing and ordinary beings are going to be together with self-grasping. And that's just the way the twin demons work. We can remove self-grasping without completely removing self-cherishing, though, because self-cherishing can happen even at a very subtle, in a very subtle way. But nonetheless, we normally see both of these demons arising and giving rise to the distorted ways of looking at things and, of course, behaving on the basis of that. Then the lines C and D, as we've been seeing, are this refrain that invokes Yamantaka to destroy them. And again, we're not talking about some other outside force coming into our lives and destroying these things for us. It means that through the force of the teachings, our guru, the three jewels, what have you, all of this, which are a support for our development, we ourselves have to cultivate conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta in order to destroy them. So it's not that, again, we're invoking something outside ourselves to do the job for us. Rather, we need that support in order to accomplish that, but it's up to us to do it. So for each of these, I've been trying to share some slides that give a little bit of advice before getting into the whole thing. This was in relation to one of the verses that's coming up tonight, but it was so general about how we work with these verses of 55 through 90, where we have those refrains, that I thought it would be good to share. This is from my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, when he gave commentary on this, which is the main commentary we're using, as well as his brief written commentary on the text. At all times, we should examine our own mind with investigation and analysis, looking at what it is doing and examining whether it is faulty or correct. Of course, these verses in those first two lines are showing where our mind and consequently our behavior is faulty, is incorrect. But this is the job that each of us has, is to tend to our own minds, to protect our own minds. Then he says we need to examine, and this was in capitals, I guess he emphasized it really strongly when he gave that teaching, our own mind, not what others are doing, not what he is doing or what she is doing, what they are doing, whatever the case might be. We're not looking at other people and trying to pick apart their minds and get to know what's wrong with them. He says, this is the job only of a spy. If we receive money for spying on others, then we need to examine them, but otherwise not. If somebody's paying you to spy on the people around you, then maybe it's okay for you to spy on them. But if they're not, well, then you need to just work on your own mind. Keep your awareness to yourself. Don't spend your time investigating others. Now, again, if we do see faults in others, treat them like a mirror. If we recognize, oh, there's this person who's really jealous, well, because I'm seeing that jealousy, that means I know jealousy. That means I can use it as a mirror to point out my own jealousy and work on my own behavior that's coming from my self-cherishing and self-grasping. Okay, so we're going to go on. We left off last week with verse 72, so we'll start with verse 73 tonight. This says, having set aside the transformative attributes of the Dharma, we make a profit instead, kind of put our energy into worldly affairs, especially here, business affairs, what have you. Having left behind our lamas dharma classes, we wander about the cities and countryside. In other words, we just get caught up in the samsaric pleasures and what have you, and don't really take advantage of what this human life affords. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin to the hearts of the enemy, the self, which once more is self-grasping, and its executioner, which is self-cherishing, maraya, which once more means to kill these. And as I've mentioned in previous classes, when we say to their hearts, in this refrain that happens in each of these verses, we mean to hit the vital point, which is the faulty way that these two minds look at things. They're looking at the I in the case of self-cherishing, and they're holding it to be supreme. I am up here, everyone else down there. My needs more important, everyone else's are, much less important. Then that's the mode of apprehension of that mind. That's what we want to get at, is to destroy that and to reverse it, of course, to learn to cherish others more and to relegate ourselves to an inferior position so that we're not constantly tending to ourselves and being blind to the needs of others, because that's antithetical to the mind of bodhicitta. Then with regard to self-grasping, its vital point, its mode of apprehension is to see the I that exists only nominally, merely. Again, we'll get into this when we get into the last several verses of this text, but it sees it to exist inherently, to exist from its own side substantially. And so again, that is the mode of apprehension of that mind, and that is also what we want to destroy, because it is totally the opposite of how the I actually exists. So again, these are the two minds that we're trying to get rid of with that refrain, and we're invoking again the wisdom and compassion of the Buddhas in the form of Yamantaka to come forward and to do that, to help us to cultivate that wisdom and compassion within ourselves. All right, so we had the verse already, 73. This is page 32, I believe, of our text. 30 or 32? Let me page down. 30, sorry, 30 of our text. So if you have it printed out, you can have that in front of you as we go through this. It says, having rejected the crossing to liberation, that is, practicing the path for attaining liberation. So in some way, having turned away from the Dharma. Oops, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Didn't go up far enough. I thought that didn't sound right. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the commentary on verse 73. The transformative attributes of the Dharma that are mentioned in the first line, where we've set aside those transformative attributes, means that our mind is transformed in dependence on practicing the holy Dharma. This is the whole purpose of the Dharma, right? Is to transform our minds from the unenlightened state we're in currently to the state of enlightenment, where we have removed all the negative tendencies, all the obscurations, all the faults, and developed all of the qualities. So then Geshe-la says, having set aside the development of the special realizations of the path in our continuum, we end up making a profit, such as putting effort into business and so forth. So we end up taking what would be the most profitable thing we could do with this life, which is to practice the Dharma and gain realizations of the path in our own minds. And we engage in a far inferior profit. We have to actually ask ourselves which would result in a greater profit, to make our lives totally dedicated to accumulating all kinds of money and being very rich and wealthy in this world, which of course we all have to leave behind when we leave this world, or to put our energy into creating the profit of practicing the Dharma, changing our minds that we take with us. The Dharma will go with you. All of what you do with your mind will go with you. So then it says, through disregarding negativities, downfalls, and bad talk, we accomplish only the causes of the bad migrations. Without listening to the Dharma from our lamas and without going to pujas, Dharma classes, and so forth, we also put effort on a daily basis into wandering about the cities and countryside. So again, both of these lines have to do with the fact that we aren't taking advantage of what this human life actually affords. We aren't doing what is necessary to make the best profit out of having this perfect human existence. So, again, instead of doing that and seeing again how that is all arising from our tendency to be very self cherishing, to put all of our energy into the profits of this world, into all of the activities that we could engage in, wandering about from country to country, from place to place, and enjoying all the pleasures of samsara. Rather than putting all our energy there, we need to actually go to the teachings, listen to the teachings with our lamas, follow their advice, use the Dharma to actually transform our minds. So again, I won't read this for all of them, but I'll read it for this first one because it's very similar in regard to each of these commentaries. Having seen that this too, or these two faults that we talked about, are the faults of our self-cherishing, we say, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, again, self-cherishing, Maraya. Okay, so that was, again, those two fit kind of nicely together because they're both about how we make use of this human life. And each of us has to do, once more, on the basis of each of these verses, some investigation as to what are these faults that we are having. Are we ending up putting much more energy into making a profit or having, pleasurable experiences within our lives versus the amount of time and energy we put into practicing the Dharma? So now we have verse 74, which says, having forsaken our own means of livelihood, in other words, not going about achieving some measure of livelihood ourselves. Again, we shouldn't go to excesses like it was just stated in the previous verse, but we should take care of ourselves and make sure that we have enough to sustain our lives. Instead of that, we appropriate community property. And here it's talking mostly about the property of the Sangha, which, of course, if we talk about that being the ordained Sangha, this would be a grave mistake to appropriate even the smallest amount of property from the ordained community, because it was given to be used by the ordained community and as representative of the jewel of the Sangha, among the three jewels. It's a very grave error, again, to take anything that belongs to them that was offered to them. Then the second one, having given up earning our own food, we steal it from others. Again, both of these very similar in terms of us not actually taking care of ourselves in responsible ways and going about misbehavior that actually causes us to accumulate great negativity, stealing, appropriating property, what have you. Okay, so I won't recite again the last two lines for each of these because I think it just gets to be maybe more repetitive than what we need. But nonetheless, remember that this is what we're doing with each of these. We're identifying how our self-cherishing and our self-grasping are involved in them. And that might be, again, a deeper reflection that each of you can do outside of this class, but we can generally see how they are playing a role. I mean, it should be pretty evident from most of the errors that are being pointed out. But then to make that determination that you want to be free of these, because we see all of the mistaken behavior that we engage in on the basis of them. So on the next page, then we have page 31, we have having forsaken without being able to earn the necessities and so forth that are our own means of livelihood. We appropriate community property from the mouths of the Sangha. Nowadays, it often happens that people who hand out money offerings and the like uh, appropriate community property. They go about doing that, but this is very dangerous, Geshe-la says, and a huge error. So again, maybe it doesn't happen so much because, well, technically it would have to be the property that belongs to a community of monks or nuns. But let me talk about that a little bit more after we go through the rest of this paragraph. It says, for example, if having taken one single bit of leaves, tea leaves, from however many bricks of tea there are that were meant for the Sangha by others, we use it, as said, from appropriating community property, rebirth in the great hell. Our destination will be none other than that hell. Now, again, these are techniques that we have been, I'm sure we've all become accustomed to in Buddhist teachings, and the Lam Rim in particular, where there are sometimes the carrot makes us feel really good about pursuing something because we know that it will end up in a good reward. And then there's the stick. And sometimes we do have to see the stick and realize that we will be not again punished. I don't like that word, but we will to face the consequences of those negative actions due to our own negative karma that we're creating. So if we appropriate the property that has been offered to the three jewels for ourselves, especially again for the Sangha, because that's the actual living beings that need to be supported by those offerings and contributions that are made to the Sangha, those ordained men and women and so on that are essentially dedicating their lives to the practice of the Dharma. Well, this is a grave error. This is something that we do want to avoid at all costs. Now, when I teach about this, I often bring to, because most of us, again, aren't around a monastic community where that's the case. Maybe we know a monk or a nun or somebody who's, in that position that we would be able to associate that with to some degree, and we'd never want to take away anything that was meant for them individually. But certainly this is mostly applicable when you're talking about a community, because they tend not to have individual property so much as they have community property. And so one of the things I point out is that although our centers aren't open right now, at TNL here in Santa Fe, for example, sometimes there would be the little donation for the library box, and people would throw books into there. And I don't know if it ever happened, but I use it as an example. Some people might come in and see, oh, donations to the library, and they go through them and they say, oh, I'd love that book. I don't have that book in my collection. And they would take it thinking, well, it's just going to go to the library, no big deal. But I think that's very similar, because that is property that has been offered to a spiritual community, to the entirety of the membership of Thupten Norbu Ling, or certainly if a book is offered to Siddhi Garba, Tibetan Buddhist Center, that would also be the community property. So we shouldn't be taking those things that weren't offered to us specifically. And if they were offered to a larger community, we should allow them to go to that larger community, because they will also have much greater benefit. If they sit on our bookshelf and we only pick it up maybe a couple of times over the course of the rest of our lives, whereas if it's in a library at one of our centers, somebody can then take it out, read it, put it back, another person take it out, read it, put it back, and so on. So again, I think that we have to be very careful with even things like that might feel like, oh, well, they've already got one copy of that in the library. I'm going to take this one because they already have it. Well, it's been offered to the Sangha. In a sense, it's not quite the same as offering it to a monastic community, but we should be very careful around anything that has to do with things that have been offered to a spiritual community. So let's go back to talk about the next line that has to do with kind of stealing things from others. It says, therefore, having understood that appropriating community property, whether great or small, as well as stealing and appropriating others' wealth due to being unable to earn our own food, wealth, and so forth, are also done out of self-cherishing, we say, the refrain, again, rant and rave, and so on. So the idea here is that if for whatever reason we are unable to sustain our own well-being, certainly there's nothing wrong with accepting the generosity of others, to go to the food bank or whatever and to receive what people have donated for people who are like you, who are not able to maintain, food on the cupboard, on the table, what have you, So certainly, it's not to be expected that we'll go through our lives and never take anything from someone. We just shouldn't appropriate it ourselves, take it from them with the intention of using it for ourselves. Because that's, of course, once more, the mind of self-cherishing that is playing a role in that, thinking, oh, this doesn't matter. They have plenty of food. I'll take it for myself. Or as I was saying with the library books, so they have, a copy of that already. I'll take that extra copy for myself. Again, if there's something that we desire, that we want, then, to ask for it, to say, well, I've lost my job, with the pandemic, there's all this going on. I don't really have the resources. I notice you have some of, this, would you mind if I took some? And then that's perfectly fine to ask people for what you need, or in some way to, align yourselves with those resources that are being provided to people who need help at this time or at any time, because certainly there are always people who need help when it comes to food or other necessities. But to take them for ourselves without any sort of regard for that other person is an act of self-cherishing. It's driven by that strong grasping at our own needs as being most important, and following through on behavior on the basis of that. So a lot of these, I'm going to have some more later tonight where I'll have some additional slides to share from a couple of other commentaries. And I think Yeah, it will be another couple before we get to those. Let me go ahead and just stay with the commentary then, and then we'll catch up on the verses when we come back to the slides, because I do have them in the slides as well. This is verse 75. It says, "Oh, our fortitude in meditation is little, but our clairvoyance is sharp." This is not meaning you actually have clairvoyance. It's a clairvoyance in quotes. It should probably be in quotes to make the meaning much clearer. So the idea here is that you haven't really put a lot of attention or energy into meditation, but you profess to have an amazing clairvoyance. Most clairvoyances are developed through meditation. You can have them inborn that you would bring in from having done that work in a prior life, but essentially, you should generally you need to engage in meditative practice in order to develop clairvoyances and so on. The second line says, "Not having begun the path, our feet senselessly race about." So even though we haven't even started the path, we still get busy with a lot of things that just fill up our time and end up again once more wasting this life. So once more, rant and rave on the head and so on, all of these things that we say at the end of each of these verses. Here, Geshe Jampa Gyatso says, "Although it is necessary to practice for a long time in order for completely pure clairvoyance and so forth to arise, we have little fortitude in meditation, in that we are unable to practice meditation for just 1 year or even just 1 month. Even though this is the case, in order to trick others, we boastfully impute sharp clairvoyance to ourselves. That is, we tell various lies about ourselves." So the idea here is that, again, we might make some profession to having these amazing qualities, but if we haven't put the work into actually gaining them, we're being deceptive with others. We're trying to trick them by virtue of what we say about our own abilities. He goes on to say, "Alternatively, when various visions of meditative experience arise in our mind under the power of interferers, such as Maras and the like," remember we talked about the Devaputra Mara, which is a being that can actually have some influence on our lives if we have that karma with them. We might even have some sort of experiences that don't have anything to do with interferers. They might even do with just something that is happening in the moment that makes us think that we're quite something special. So it says, as much as we can, we end up telling the extent of their arisal to others. We boast about them and think, "Oh, I'm such a great meditator. I had this sensation of levitating," or something, or whatever the case might be. So Lama Dharmarakshita, or the author of our text, through also being thoroughly amazed by people who do this, says, "Oh," right at the beginning. So again, in the verse at the beginning, we had it starting, "Oh, our fortitude in meditation is little, but our clairvoyance is sharp," or whatever it is that we're boasting about in terms of our meditation practice. In addition, in the second line, as it says in the commentary here, "If we run about, although it is necessary to go to the Buddha ground, we will not begin the path to it even in the slightest." If we end up kind of just going from one thing to another, flitting around all over the world, all over, various places, traveling, whatever, putting our energy into other activities, worldly activities, we're not going to even begin the path in the slightest. Then he says, "Instead, senselessly our feet, which are able to reach everywhere, including India, China, and so on, speedily race about." They just kind of, again, I don't think we have to take it literally as our feet. We might even take it as our minds, instead of actually settling down and putting our energy into the path, we have minds that are constantly looking for something else, another distraction, another thing that we can get involved in. "Oh, that sounds like good. I'll go there. I'll do this. I'll do that." We've got minds that are like these feet running everywhere. So once more, having seen that the one who makes us do this is also our self-cherishing, we make that same refrain. So it is interesting, Venerable Thupten Chodron, in her commentary on this, she points out another clairvoyance that is actually called the legs of magical emanation, which is this fast legs. That's how it manifests sometimes. They say that they do have these experiences of these lamas who have these amazing abilities, that they will be in one place, and within seconds they will be like hundreds of miles in another place. That's because they have this ability to run really quickly. But if we define it that way, then maybe again, it would mean that you're kind of taking advantage of these abilities that you develop on the path, and you're not doing anything meaningful with them. You're not actually accomplishing the path. Because remember, our verse said, not having begun the path, our feet, senselessly race about. So the idea is that if you're putting all your energy into just doing all these things that don't end up resulting in any sort of spiritual accomplishments, then what would be the point? The bodhisattva who attains these clairvoyances, whether we're talking about the clairvoyances of knowing others' minds, of knowing the past lives, various things that you can access through these concentrations, or even these legs of magical emanation, these things are not attained so that you can use them in frivolous ways. They're attained so that you can benefit other beings. And that's what the bodhisattva develops these for. So again, they would definitely cultivate them within their practice of the path. So if we see that we are attached to those sorts of things as well, spiritual accomplishments that might manifest in these various abilities, this wouldn't be a healthy way to go about practicing our path. And instead, we should put our energy into meditation, as it said in that first line. Don't let our fortitude for meditation be small. Rather, put energy into that. And of course, practice the path, practice all the teachings of the stages of the path. All right, so that's all I have to say on verse 75. Let's go forward to verse 76. Whoops, this does that with these PDF files. There we go. Okay, so Dharma Rakshita says in this verse, when someone tells us something beneficial, we consider them with animosity to be an enemy. So this is like somebody who really wants to point out something good to you that would be good for you to know and for you to practice. And it's given with affection. It's advice that we should follow, and we consider that person to be an enemy, a foe. We even get angry or upset at them, right? Because we don't want to hear from that person as to how we should improve our minds or whatever. Then, secondly, when someone tricks and cheats us, though, we consider that heartless one to be kind. So if somebody's really deceptive with you, but they say all sorts of beautiful, wonderful things about you, and they get into your psyche, and you make you think that they're buttering you, or that you don't see that they're buttering you up, but you're feeling really good about all that they're saying and doing for you, you end up considering that person to be extremely kind. Your allegiance to them might be greater than to the people who are good-hearted, who are pointing out a fault that you can work on. So these two, again, kind of go well together. And that is the case with many of these. Sometimes the relationship isn't quite as clear. But here you have, somebody who's very genuine, honest, heartfelt in doing something for you, and you turn them away. And then you have, secondly, somebody who's very deceptive and trying to, uh, take advantage of you. And you, because of the nice things they're saying, you really warm up to them and give them a lot of energy, attention, see them as very kind. So it says here in Geshe-la's commentary, nowadays, when our lamas, parents, and others, out of affection, mention our faults, that is, express them straightforwardly with a benevolent mind, most of us, with animosity, consider them to definitely be an enemy, thinking, I will tell you one of your own faults. This is that whole thing of retaliating, giving harm where you've received harm, which of course is not a practice of the bodhisattva, and it's only coming from our self-cherishing mind. If somebody points out our faults, we should listen to that with our ears wide open and hear what they have to say. And if we find that the fault is not something that we actually possess due to our deeper, honest investigation of ourselves, we can still feel like, thank you for your time in doing that. It's very kind of you to try to help me on to develop greater qualities. If what they say is meaningful for us, it's actually something that we can see as a fault that we need to attend to. We should be so glad that, again, they're holding up the mirror to us and saying, can you see you've got this fault? Well, how amazing. What kindness. So these beings deserve kindness, but we end up being mean to them. We end up having animosity. Then in that next part, he says, when others, motivated by dissimulation and deceit, act to trick and cheat us, saying everything you do is sure to be just right, we consider them to be kind through thinking they are definitely someone who benefits me. I mean, we kind of see them acting in that way, but we don't know that they're being deceitful, that they're putting on airs. Those who trick us like that are called heartless ones. They do not recognize the difference between the beneficial and the harmful. So we don't want to succumb to just, especially people saying all sorts of nice things about us while we are, perhaps being deceived by them. Those two words that were on the other thing, of course, most of us know what deceit is. Deceit is where somebody is actually taking advantage of us by lying to us, by saying something that is not true. They are not revealing all of their faults to us. Whereas dissimulation is where you are hiding things. You're kind of putting on pretense. You're pretending to be better than you are. So hiding your faults is deceit. Exaggerating your good qualities is dissimulation or pretense. It's often even called hypocrisy, where people pretend to be so much greater than they are, but they aren't. And so we've been cheated by people who are like that, who have taken advantage of us due to the skill they have with pulling the wool over our eyes. So this is something, again, that we just, it's whether this has happened or not isn't the point. It's just that we have the opposite reaction. We consider those people to be really kind, and we consider the person who's actually being kind and pointing out our faults to be really mean. So again, that's coming from our self-cherishing mind, which is cherishing our attachment to wanting to be praised, never wanting to be criticized, wanting people to say good things about us. And we really enjoy all of that, right? And that's our self-cherishing mind that wants to hear all of that, that wants to think more of ourselves. One of the things I forgot to point out when we got into this verse 76 is that in some teachings that I actually have the DVD of the teachings that His Holiness gave some time ago, quite a long time ago now, on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And I think they may have been done for the Deer Park Buddhist Center up in Madison, I believe. I don't know for sure. But anyway, I listened to those many years ago when I first taught on this text, and I have my little notes from that in here. And I think it's in those teachings that His Holiness said that from this verse until we get close to the end of this whole section, it's actually pointing out character flaws or kind of faulty personality traits that we have, things that we are subject to on the basis of these minds. Whereas before we saw it more around certain behaviors and things like that. But these are actually character traits that we would have of, again, getting angry and upset when somebody's trying to benefit you, and then really being, enamored of people who are being deceptive with us just because they're saying nice things about us. So these, again, are pointing more, as we're going to see, and these are actually, in my estimation, some of the best verses to work with from this section, because they point out all of these potential flaws that every one of us has, probably to some degree. We might not have them in an excessive way, but we can certainly see what we have to work on in regard to what Dharma Rakshita is pointing out in these verses. So I don't think, again, that I had anything that I needed to share on the slides with that. I think it's for the next verse, 77, yeah, where I have some additional. So verse 77 says, "We tell the confidential talk that depends on being family to enemies." And this, of course, is referring to the fact that if somebody shares something with you in confidence about themselves, and they consider you to be family, then they consider you to be a confidant, somebody that they can entrust that to. And you end up sharing what they shared with their enemies. How horrible of you, that you've actually, it probably shouldn't share it with anybody. I mean, this is the thing, is that if somebody has talked to us in confidence, we should definitely retain that to ourselves and not speak anything to anyone else. But here the idea is you go to the extreme of revealing what this person has shared to you in confidence with somebody who is their enemy. Then secondly, when we have close friends, we unabashedly steal their hearts and minds. So when we have people who come closer into our own circle of confidants and what have you, we end up taking advantage of them. We end up breaking that trust that we should have with them. Both of these are kind of about trust. It's kind of an interesting approach to it, to kind of understand that this is an important quality that we need to have in our relationships with others, as well as in the world at large. So I will share some slides from Venerable Thupten Chodron, I think, is where I'm going to be quoting some things from her, that she talks a little bit about confidence and working with that. Geshe-la says, for example, when someone who is considered by a lord or the like to be the best member of the household among all their servants tells all the lord's secrets, that servant without integrity passes on all this confidential talk to the side of the enemy. Again, I don't know why we have to use things like servants and lords and what have you. I guess because it's based on an Indian text. But if anybody who you consider to be, a confidant, again, that you tell something to, that you share secrets with, that you share your experiences, that you don't want to go any further, well then, that person should be holding those in confidence and not revealing them to others. In this case, as I said, they're going so far as to reveal them to somebody who can actually make use of them to become harmful to that person who shared the secret in the first place. In addition, when we have a friend with whom we are close, that is, when we befriend someone through taking them into our heart, by examining their faults as much as we can without being ashamed and embarrassed, in the end, we cheat those people. We kind of take advantage of them. We see, kind of become very astute at finding their faults, the ways we can manipulate them and take advantage of them. Acting like this is known even in the world as stealing someone's heart and mind. And perhaps some of us have been on the receiving end of something like that, where we befriended somebody and thought that they were being very, very accommodating to who we were, that we were forming a good friendship, that everything was going well. And in the meantime, they were just using all of what we were sharing with them, all of what they saw in us that they could take advantage of, to do that, to actually, take advantage of our faults and achieve whatever it is that they wanted to achieve on the basis of that relationship. So once more, if we've done that to somebody, well, then that's of course our self-cherishing mind that's not thinking about that other person and what their needs are and what have you, and taking advantage of what we've seen in them that are faults, that we could in some way manipulate them or get what we want from them. So again, hopefully this hasn't happened with regard to each of us, but if it has, we see where it's coming from. So let's go forward to 77. And I actually do have a alternate translation, and why I'm sharing that is because I think that there is a little bit of a fine tuning of some of this, especially with what Venerable Tipton Chodron says. When people treat me as their family, I reveal their secrets to their foes. And it spells it out much more clearly than I think the first line that we had, which was, we tell the confidential talk that depends on being family to enemies. Kind of, again, if people treat you as their family, as someone very close to you, don't reveal their secrets to anyone, much less their foes. Secondly, when people befriend me with affection, I betray their trust with no pangs of conscience. Again, uh, whenever we're forming relationships with others, it should be built on trust, on being able to maintain the integrity of that relationship by not taking advantage of the other person or not revealing things that the other person shared to us in confidence. So again, in that text, they use a different refrain, but it's the same words in Tibetan. It's just a different way of translating those last two lines. Okay, so in Good Karma, Venerable Thupten Chodron says, betraying others' trust not only sparks their anger and sometimes fear, but it also makes it more difficult for them to trust others later on. When word gets out that we revealed others' confidential matters or use them for our own gain, others lose respect and trust in us as well. And this is kind of showing, I like what she pointed out here, because it's not just showing that, again, we have some karma from that we experience a lifetime or two down the road, but rather we can experience it in this life. If people become aware that you broke the confidence of someone else and revealed it to someone who could actually take advantage of it, or if you took advantage of other people through the close relationship they had with you, well, then that can get around. People can hear these sorts of things and go, they're not somebody that you want to talk to in confidence. And then, so then maybe people wouldn't even befriend that person because they know that they're not trustworthy. So we don't want to break the trust and the confidence we have with anyone. This will continue into future lives, making it difficult for us to trust others and difficult for them to trust us. There is that future karma. That's certainly an aspect of all of these that we have to be aware of, is we're creating patterns that will ripen into future existences. Trust is an essential ingredient in fulfilling relationships, which our behavior will deprive us of. Then she goes on to say, and I found this quite interesting. That's why I wanted to share this in particular. She says, in a reversal of the situation, when somebody tells me something about another person's confidential business, if somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, so and so said this to me in confidence, but I can share it with you," unless it is an extraordinary situation that calls for this information to be revealed, I know that I should not trust that person. So if somebody comes to you and they reveal something that somebody spoke to them in confidence, that might be a red flag to say, well, I wonder if they've shared things I've shared with them in confidence. I do find, and I'm not trying to, again, point out any errors. I may make this error myself, I'm sure. Sometimes when people share things in confidence with us, we might think, well, confidence means I can share it with people that I have confidence with or that I trust that with. And I think we have to be really, really careful on that, because if that person also is sharing it with people that they feel they have confidence with, it's gone so far out away from that confidence that that person had with you, that that's really going to potentially become, a grave error, something that again is going to have consequences that we may not have intended at all. We thought we were quite innocent in sharing it with that one person. The other thing that she points out, I think is going to come in the slides when we go back to him, is that the truth also gets embellished over time, right? What was it, telephone that everyone played when you were a kid? And by the time, you whisper in the person's ear next to you and they whisper in the person's ear next to you, by the time it made it all the way around, it was a totally different story, right? you know this happens frequently, that people actually see kind of ways of to change the story. They don't hear everything perfectly, they don't have exact memory, and they also embellish things to make it even juicier. And so before you know it, everyone's talking about something, and what the person originally said to that first person might not even be what's getting circulated. Yeah, Laura, you've got your hand up.
Well,
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, isn't this basically gossip?
Well, gossip to some degree, but I think this is deeper than gossip, because again, it's something that someone has told you in confidence. And we should be able to tell people that we are close to in confidence things that we feel, can be shared for whatever reason. I mean, sometimes we should check our motivation of why we are sharing things, because sometimes maybe we want someone to be in our camp secretly or something, to kind of side with us in regard to something. Other times we might just simply need to have an acknowledgement of our own pain, our own difficulty, our own, whatever we're going through. But I think this is different than gossip. I mean, it becomes gossip as it starts spreading out. But the initial thing is someone confiding in you. If you had a sibling or a friend or a child or someone who said something to you in confidence, and then you, again, whether it's to an enemy or not, I don't think is the real crux of all of this. It's mentioned as, you tell it to a foe or an enemy. Well, that could be the worst thing to do, right? But I think even telling it to your own friends, who once more you may feel that you can trust, and maybe it doesn't go any further. Maybe they stop there because they have really good integrity around that. They say, no, I won't be talking to anyone else about that. And that's great. But can you be sure that that's going to happen? Because why did you talk to that person that you were, confided in? I'm sorry, why did you talk to another person after someone confided in you? So I think we have to look at this and kind of say we need to break the chain right here. The buck stops here. We have to say, anytime anyone confides in us, anything that they say, I'm telling this to you in confidence, please don't tell anyone else, then we zip our lips. And then none of the other happens. So I agree with you. There is gossip that starts happening further out, but I'm mostly wanting to focus on what happens at that point where somebody confides in you and tells you something that, again, they want you to keep to themselves and to yourself, and you break that confidence. So yeah, Mary Jo, you've got your hand up as well. Yeah. So you need to unmute, and then great.
Yes, yes, it reminds me of, you know, right speech, it's called in some traditions. And I like something, I may not quote it exactly, but what Jack Cornfield, I think, said was something like, when you're saying something, and check it out. Is it true first? Is it necessary second? And is it beneficial?
Mm.
And I felt, I don't know, but that's been helpful to me.
Mhm.
anyway, sometimes I don't know. It's just like, I don't know, maybe it's more with women than men, but you just want to share something, and it's what somebody told you that's kind of exciting or kind of new or something like that. So
Yeah.
thank you. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just any particular gender. I think it's a common human trait. I think we all, like a juicy secret or something, and then we can't wait to tell it to someone else, and I think this is one of the problems is that people have started to define somebody telling you something in confidence to mean, oh, then I can only share it with people who I feel I can entrust that to. Maybe that's not
Mhm.
true for most of you, but I do see that in the world, and so we do have to be very careful once more. But I agree with you. I think there's even that little anagram for think. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it what's the I? Anyone?
I
Is it
um,
necessary? Is it, uh,
kind.
Inspired,
I'm sorry, what was it, Mark?
inspirational.
Inspirational? It could be K. I don't know. There's something for the K anyway, because they say you're supposed to think
Kind, maybe.
kind, maybe that's it. You're supposed to think before you say something. And so if you apply that question, is it true? Is it, helpful? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it inspirational or whatever? Then you actually go through a process before you speak, and so absolutely. No, it is an important thing that we have to attend to in terms of how we, again, say things to others if we are going to confide in them, but then if others have confided in us, to make sure that we don't break that confidence. Yeah, Mary Jo, another question, comment?
Well, a comment, really. I
Uh-huh.
have to say, when I was in the working world as a nurse,
Mhm.
it seemed like I was really working with that because the workplace was my laboratory. And I mean, pretty soon I wasn't saying anything to anybody. And that felt a little strange too, because it feels like a lot of our small talk is kind of like greasing the wheels of working together or something. I don't know, camaraderie or something like that. So I have to say, wow, it was really something when I was really thinking, well, no, that's not really necessary. And so, I mean, it felt strange to be kind of just not saying hardly anything at all.
I'm sure, and especially, yeah, like a community like that needs to be somewhat tight knit because of the work they're all doing together, so
Yeah.
Um, eh, I think it's hard. We have to find maybe skillful ways to introduce speech that meets those criteria, which means that perhaps we don't then talk about others in any kind of demeaning way. We talk about good things that we've heard about people, stories that you've heard at the end of the news at night, in the nightly news when they bring up a nice inspiring story of a young kid that is helping homeless people or something like that. You have to try to, introduce things to talk about that will still bring people together and allow a forum for things to be discussed, but not get into, yeah, the sort of negative speech that could be critical or whatever. So it's hard. It's really hard. Let me finish off the slides here for this one, because again, I did have a little bit more of Venerable Tipton Children's words that I did want to share that are along the lines of what I said. So again, the previous one said, I know that I should not trust that person if they come to you and say something that they heard from someone else in confidence. Why not? Oh, he is likely to blab what I say in confidence. Similarly, if I see someone mistreat someone else, I stay clear of that person, knowing that if I become friendly with her, there's a high likelihood that she will treat me the same way. Now, again, if you're a really high level bodhisattva, you might be able to go to those difficult people and actually maybe even help them or be with them. But I think it's perfectly fine what she's saying here for us to have that be our kind of respecting who that person is and recognizing that if that's the pattern that they live their lives by and they abuse friends and what have you, well then why should I become a party to that? Why should I help them to create that kind of negative karma? So again, we have to look at it from both sides and kind of how we might be most compassionate to others by avoiding things that put them in a position where they engage in more negativity. Okay, that's it for verse 77. All right, yeah, Mary Jo, and then we'll take our break. Mhm.
Yes, but I was just visiting with a friend kind of about this, and sometimes it feels like there must be a way to interrupt certain abusive things. Like, say, you live next door to somebody and you get an understanding that there's somebody is beating up on somebody, and it feels that there's a calling to interrupt or to do something to somehow interrupt that kind of behavior. And like, I don't know, like going over and saying, oh, I needed to borrow a couple of eggs, I wonder if you had some. Or you know I don't know. I don't know if it's interfering in the karma which needs to happen, or but it does feel that sometimes to be silent is not the highest kind of behavior, maybe. What do you think?
Oh, I agree with you, Mary Jo. And again, I don't think this verse or any of the Buddha's teachings is telling us to be silent with regard to everything going on around us, because I believe in my heart that every one of us has to take responsibility for the world that we live in, whether it be the microcosm of a neighborhood where you have people who are perhaps, again, some abuse going on or something, or whether it be in the larger states, nations, the world at large, where we have a lot of abuse that is going on that we need to be very vocal about. It's just, once more, we have to do it with the right motivation. In the case of this example, someone's ending up speaking to someone else, probably out of self-cherishing, right? Out of just wanting to have the joy of telling that juicy bit about that person that was shared with them, with another person, or with, again, even their enemy, their foe. If you were to say something to somebody who was dealing with an abusive situation, whether you tried to befriend the one who was being abused or tried to work with the abuser, that would be very noble if you're doing it with the right motivation, out of compassion for that situation, trying to help it to cease or to be some sort of reconciliation. But these things are very tricky. I mean, in our world, people die when they try to intervene sometimes in abusive relationships or what have you. So it's not to say that every one of us should feel confident in doing that, but we should, where we can and feel skillful enough, try to intervene to help others to be free of suffering. It's kind of like, again, the example that was used in the master's program, Jumpa Gendon, who was the teaching assistant there. He said, for example, when apartheid was happening in South Africa, if everyone in the world had just simply said, well, apartheid this must be the karma of the Africans in South Africa to experience apartheid, and that's their karma, and we just have to let it alone. Well, that wouldn't have done much good for those people, right? Instead, because of the embargoes and all the other things that were done and the pressure that was put on the South African government, and I'm not saying it's completely gone out of South Africa. The things I hear say there still are so many issues that the native population, South Africans deal with in terms of what's going on there. But the reality is that it would have been very uncompassionate to not intervene in some way. So I think we're all called upon to do what we can, but once more, don't think that that means that you just put your life completely at risk when you're maybe not ready for that level of endangerment in your life. Maybe it means that you have to be very skillful and very cautious in how you go about helping. And if you can't help, if there's really feel like, oh, well, this is too violent of a situation for me to do much about, well, you could certainly call the police to intervene. That could get ugly too, though. And you wouldn't want to necessarily feel like, wow, I created that horrible situation. But that is the job of people who are in, law enforcement, is to help to curtail those sorts of, violent situations. The other thing is, I mean, you can certainly continue to pray for people, to continue to have strong intentions. May I be able to benefit people in those situations with a greater ability than what I currently have. But I don't know, these are really hard. Everyone would be individual. Every situation, we have to look at our own, what we can do, what we feel comfortable doing, what we think will be beneficial, and go through a really detailed investigation first before we just interject into the situation. But absolutely, I agree with you. We shouldn't sit back and be silent as the world, goes crazy all around us. Yeah. That's why, again, I think it's not emphasized perhaps as much in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition as it is in some of the other Buddhist traditions. But we have to be advocates of social justice. We have to be advocates of justice in whatever way, regardless of whatever is going on, to try to do what we can to assure that those who are suffering are tended to, and those who are being victimized in the moment, as much as we understand the karmic thing going on there, that they are tended to and not made a victim any longer. But we wouldn't use violent or harmful means to do that. Instead, we would find peaceful means of doing that, non-violent means. So, all right, let's take our break. It's about 7:07 already, so let's call it 7:08. So at 7:18, we will return, and I will ring the bell. Some people may have their video camera off. Sergio. Okay, good. All right, well, let's go ahead and resume. Looks like the recording is going, so that's great. Was there, no questions? Let's see. Let me go back to the text, and we'll carry on with verse 78. Again, this is still a continuation of these sort of, again, character traits or character flaws that we might have. Our annoyance is high, and our conceptualizations are coarser than everyone's. So we might, again, have this trait of being really easy to annoy, and having even maybe a bit of a sort of cautiousness or paranoia even about people through these conceptualizations. We'll talk about those in a moment when we get into the slides. We are difficult to get along with, and our bad temper constantly manifests. It would become really challenging for others. Again, and we might not have these to the extreme that are being talked about here, but every one of us no doubt has some level of annoyance, and no doubt we have some ways that our temper arises and manifests and makes it difficult for others to get along with us. So we have to be mindful, again, of whatever way that these are manifesting. We don't want them to occur because we see that they are a part and parcel of the self-cherishing mind. They block us from opening up to the welfare of others, and they're also driven by the ignorance of self-grasping. So we make the same request for Yamantaka to rant and rave on the head of these conceptions, and so on. Geshe Jampa Gyatso in his commentary says, "It is said, their annoyance is superior to that of a Sen spirit of Tsang." You might wonder what these Sen spirits of Tsang are. I'll share a little bit of what Geshe-la commented on that. Moreover, the annoyance of the Sen spirits of Tsang, known as excellent Vajra, who enters into bodies and inflicts harm for the slightest thing, is very high. So apparently this being has, a lot of ability to be annoyed really quite easily. So similarly, the annoyance that with respect to others looking at us as excellent, faulty, and so on also thinks, why is he doing that to me, is high. So anything that we have, again, that is arising from our own ability to be annoyed quite easily. Coarse conceptualizations, which was again in that first line, are taken to be very coarse and bad conceptualizations that do not accord with the Dharma. For instance, not being able even to bend forward due to the soul conceptualization that thinks, for example, whatever I do, will there not be a fault in this and a fault in that? So the way that he's describing this is kind of akin to the way that it's talked about in Venerable Thupten Chodron's book, that this is almost kind of, again, a bit of a suspicious superstition, even maybe like a paranoia that one might have around various behaviors and what have you. So let me go and share what Geshe-la and Venerable Thupten Chodron say. Well, actually, let me finish this off. I think it's probably better that I just go ahead and do this whole commentary. In addition, in that second line, we are difficult to get along with even for those who are our friends, and our bad temper constantly manifests. We kind of become the thorn in the side for other people, cause them kind of misery by virtue of our own difficulty, our own, again, it could be irritability, annoyance, what have you. Um, so the idea here of, I guess, this being very easy to irritation, and then, of course, inflicting some lack of peace in the minds of others who befriend us. So here, first of all, the alternate version, which I also like to share sometimes when I'm going into Venerable Tipton Children's commentary, it seems to be helpful. The first two lines in particular, she says, "My ill temper is intense." Actually, this is Tupten Chodron, or Tupten Jimpa's translation that Venerable Tupten Chodron uses in her text. "My ill temper is intense, my paranoia coarser than everyone's. Hard to befriend, I constantly provoke others' negative traits, kind of constantly bring out the worst in others, through our own behavior." So first of all, with regard to these Zen spirits of Sang, kind of hard to say really quickly, fast. Someone who is very bad-tempered and rough, like the Zen spirits of Sang, known as excellent Vajra Sadhu or Dorje Legpa in Tibetan, who enter people's bodies, is said to have high annoyance. I guess they're sort of these spirits that, again, you can receive some spirit harm from, once more, if you've generated that type of karma. And these spirits, this one particular spirit, has this high annoyance. It has an inability to um, kind of, I guess, yeah, bear with things. And so it becomes annoyed really easily, which I guess you wouldn't want to do to a Zen spirit that was inhabiting somebody. In fact, there's also a protector, Geshe-la says, related to Hayagriva, who is called Samaya-bound Vajrasadhu. He wears a hat, rides a lion, holds a Vajra, and enters the body of an oracle. If you've ever seen the Nechung oracle or these various oracles in Tibet, they go into a trance sort of thing, and apparently there is some sort of commingling of these spirits with them when they are in that trance that allows some additional clairvoyance or seeing of things or whatever. But anyway, Geshe-la talked a bit about that. This protector. These sense spirits of song are known to become annoyed at even very tiny things. If, like this, we become annoyed even when others just look at us, asking ourselves, why is he looking at me? So too do we have high annoyance. And again, that's kind of pointing to this conceptualization being a form of a paranoia almost, where we are projecting onto somebody things that are not really there, that there's some suspicion around people being involved with us or whatever. Again, these are the situations that's spelled out here, but I think we have to just dial it down to how easily are we annoyed or irritated by others? And that's coming from our self-cherishing mind. Because even, yeah, I mean, we might have people who mean well, but we impute on them all kinds of unfavorable characteristics. And then in addition, Geshe-la says, we have coarse conceptualizations that do not accord with the Dharma, that make us think, if I do this, that will happen. If I do that, this will happen, due to which we become unable to bend our body back and forward out of fear that if we do so, we might die. So the way he's describing this again makes it almost sound like, again, some sort of superstition, a superstitious mind that is akin to paranoia or again, uh, suspicion that is causing us to be very fearful in whatever we're doing. So again, that may or may not be there for you, but certainly if the annoyance factor is there for you, well, then we need to take that to heart. Here in Good Karma, Venerable Thupten Chodron says the Tibetan word that is translated as paranoia in the translation she was using, again by Thupten Jinpa, we translated it as conceptualizations or coarse conceptualizations. In the first line, the Tibetan word for that is namtok. We encountered this word previously in verse 34, where it was translated as negativities of degeneration. It means preconception or superstitious thought that makes up stories. And again, this too, we might not have it to the degree where we become paranoid, but to what degree are we doing that with almost everyone we meet, making up a story about who they are and what they're about, maybe based on just a sentence or two we've heard from them. Uh, these kinds of prejudgments that we have about people that are really not fair and only get us into trouble. Here, our mind is fabricating the story. These people are gossiping behind my back, or they're plotting to do something against me. We become unnecessarily suspicious, anxious, and fearful. So this is how she, interprets this of what's going on in this verse, where we have this annoyance and these conceptualizations that are very coarse, this paranoia, this suspicion, what have you. Sometimes the suffering caused by anxiety and fear is greater than the suffering of the situation actually occurring. But that is arising once more from our self-cherishing, that is not willing to kind of be with situations. It's always going to take a way of looking at it that's distorted, that's through the lens of holding our own needs first, and therefore thinking that others are out to get us, or whatever that mind of paranoia is thinking. All right, so then on to verse 79. We'll go ahead and read it from here, and then we'll go to the commentary. When appealed to, we turn away without listening and inflict harm. When bowed to, we do not bow in return, but from a distance look for an argument. So again, when appealed to can mean a couple of things. And in Geshe-la's commentary, it's going to have a different meaning perhaps than in Venerable Thupten Chodron. So we'll come back to the slide and go through the translation that she uses and her interpretation of this. Because I think that she really does try, to make these things quite relevant to our everyday lives. And I think it's useful to hear some of what she has to say. Nonetheless, Geshe-la in his commentary, which starts at the top of page, this must be what, page 31, no, 32, maybe 33, I guess 33. When someone appeals to us, we do not listen, means, for example, that when our lamas and others appeal to us to practice the Dharma, saying, you should do this and that Dharma, we turn away without listening to them. And by means of not doing so and doing something else, we inflict harm on them. Again, there's different interpretations of what that means, but this can be that type of an example where someone is coming to you with a good intention to want you to do something, but you turn around and inflict harm on them instead, rather than following their good advice. When other people bow toward us, kind of giving us respect, we should bow back to them to show equal respect. However, in addition to not doing that, Geshe-la says, from a distance, we look for an argument with them. That is, in a roundabout way, we look for an argument such that in the end, we denounce our lamas and leaders and so forth. So again, if anyone is showing you respect, you shouldn't, or even if at some point they bow out of an argument and then we still want to continue the argument, that can be another way that this manifests. This is not good. This is just agitating others and causing others to get involved with our own crazy, silly minds. So having seen that this too is the fault of self-cherishing and so on. So let's go back to the slides, and there's again a slightly different interpretation of this, but you may find it relevant and something you can maybe get a little bit more out of. This is the way Thupten Jinpa translated this. He says, when people ask for favors, I ignore them, yet covertly cause them harm. When someone respects my wishes, I don't concur, but seek disputes from afar. So again, each of these she's going to comment on. Let me share her commentary, which again, I think is quite relevant. Sometimes people ask us for help and we blatantly pretend that we did not hear them, or we use our stash of excuses. The current universal excuse is I'm too busy. This is something that I have to be mindful myself about doing. I am a busy person, but I don't ever want people to start to think, oh, well, they can't ask Don because Don's always too busy, because that's not necessarily true, But I think each of us has to look at this and see to what degree when someone comes to us for help. So this is very different interpretation of that. The other one for that Geshe-la had was when somebody's coming you to get you to practice the Dharma or do something like a Lama is encouraging you. Here, it's not that type of an appeal. It's actually people asking you for assistance. Well, be careful. We might even end up lying to them if we say I'm too busy, because the reality is, as she says here, of course, we always have time to do the things that we like, but when somebody asks us for a hand and we don't feel like helping, we are definitely too busy. So, I'm too busy comes out when we don't want to do something, but then maybe somebody else calls us and they say, oh, I need some help with this, but it's because you like that person better and you'd rather spend time with them, and maybe you enjoy even the task that they need some help with, then you happily do it, right? But of course, as it says here, we always have time to do the things that we like. It's just a matter of how we structure our time. So I think we have to be real careful again whenever anybody is asking something of us, to be quite honest. And if we end up saying, well, I'm sorry, but that's really, that's not something I can do for you, or something I don't feel like doing right now. It sounds pretty brutal, but maybe that is the truth that someone needs to hear, rather than saying, oh, well, I'm really too busy. Because that's really lying. It's giving, again, some deceitful, um, uh, having a deceitful practice with others that we should be more honest with. Not only do we ignore people's requests, this is that second line, we also, I'm sorry, it's the last part of the first line. We also turn around and cause them harm. Obnoxious and mean, when people ask for help, we instead cheat them, steal their things, and ruin their relationships. Again, maybe we don't go to that extent, but we should be very cautious around not doing anything that causes harm to others that are actually coming to us for help. Okay. And then this is the second line. Even when somebody is nice to us and respects our wishes, we are still dissatisfied and stir up conflict. Someone tries to make amends after an argument, but we keep hammering in that we are right and he or she are wrong. They're wrong, I'm right. This can happen, right? Where we have these argumentation that we just simply want to keep going. For what reason? Even when that person has maybe backed down and says, oh no, that's fine. I don't, you're right, it's okay. And you still want to kind of keep rubbing their nose in it. And what does our self-centered thought think it will get out of making others feel bad? She has that question in this section, and I think it's a good one to entertain. When we are involved in that, if it's coming from our self-centeredness, our self-cherishing, what does it think we're going to, what do you think we're going to get out of that by keeping someone in an argumentative mood, by harming somebody who really wants our help, our assistance? So I think we have to be very cautious around those types of behaviors, where ideally the bodhisattva ethic is to do the opposite, is to always want to help others in some way. If we can't help at the moment, literally, where it's impossible, then do what we can to help them to find help, or to, be of some assistance if we can't be the ones to do it. And certainly don't keep others in argumentative states. There's that one little thing, I think I shared it when we went through the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, of the duck and the chicken. Do you remember the story of the duck and the chicken? Where the couple was walking along. I'm going to shorten it a lot, but essentially they're walking along and they're having a nice little day out in the countryside or whatever. And suddenly there's, quack, 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 quack. And the one person says, oh, a chicken. And the other one says, no, that's a duck. And he goes, they hear it go again, quack, 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 quack. And he goes, I'm sure that's a chicken. The other says, no, I'm absolutely sure it's a duck. And they end up getting into this huge argument about whether it's a duck or a chicken. And then, of course, at one point, the person who thinks it's a duck, which it is a duck because it's quacking, anyway, it backs down and says, oh, you must be right. It must be a chicken. And so we have the ability at any time to detach ourselves from those kinds of arguments, especially duck or chicken type of arguments that really don't matter much at all, right? Whether it's a duck or a chicken, who cares? But we have that tendency to want to be right, right? And to correct the other person in their thinking. If it's nothing that's vital, I mean, if it's not like the person's going to turn off a road into a cliff and go to their doom or something, well then you don't need to correct that person. You just say, oh, that's okay, yeah, I don't need to be the one that's right. But we get so invested in that, right? That's a bit of this argumentative state, I think, that is being talked about here, where we just want to keep going because we want to be told that we're right. We want to know that we're right. We want to have that sort of victory. Yeah, Mary Jo. Yeah, there you go.
I just have to say, I had one of those duck and chicken times the other day, and I was actually able to right away just sidestep it. And oh my gosh, it felt so great. Anyway, I don't get to do that very often. I mean, you caught right in there. But the other thing is these arguments, I have a friend and I've had really a hard time because we have very opposing views about the value of being vaccinated. And I don't even understand her thinking. It is impossible for me to understand. And I really get angry. And I finally, it's taken me so long, but I finally figured out I just can't get into this arena with her. You
Right.
know, if it comes up, I just have to just change the subject. And it feels kind of like a failure of mine that I cannot somehow find the words and I can't quite get her to understand. And finally, I just thought, you know what? She's not going to understand my view. And I must somehow respect her view, which is very hard for me to do, but mostly just sidestep it. And so it's been very interesting because it's been problematic
Uh,
for weeks and months
mm,
now.
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
No, thank you for sharing that, both of those, Mary Jo. Yeah, and I'm glad you had the victory yourself to be able to sidestep it with the one. But we can see sometimes that we step into it really easily with some people, and then we have to just stop doing it. I have to admit, that I've got a weird karma with my brother, and my brother and I have gotten into just phone conversations where he was visiting my mom once, and we started talking, and it just got to this place where I just said, Daryl, can you put mom on? I just didn't want to talk to him anymore because I realized that it was just not going anywhere. I don't think that he was going to be able to see my point of view. I couldn't really see his. And so that's okay. We do get so invested in wanting to make sure that we can correct the other person's thinking. And, maybe that's not our job, especially about things that in the end, even with something like vaccination, it still is a very personal choice. And whatever the way the person is seeing it, we're probably not going to be the one that changes them, so best to just back off and, you know, again, we can pray for them, have, whatever thoughts towards them, send them some loving kindness, whatever the case might be. That's going to be much more productive than arguing with them all day, so
Yes,
thank you.
yes, I kind of felt like not only what I felt like I was doing it for the world. The world we need more and more and more people to get the herd effect and everything. And
Yeah.
so it was kind of like saving the world on the one
Yeah.
side. But
No, I know your intentions were good. I mean, and that's the thing with most of us, that we do have good intentions, but we end up kind of stepping in it, and it's not a good thing. But any other comments before we move on? Okay. Or questions? All right. Let's go back to the text and go on to verse 80. So let me scroll up here a little bit. We do not like advice when others are freely giving us advice that they think would be really beneficial for us. Maybe this is what we're just kind of talking about, but now we're the ones on the receiving end of that advice. And it is always difficult for us to go along with it. We always hold tightly to the many things that offend us. So again, this is that type of idea that we find it really uncomfortable generally for people who want to give us advice, who want to speak their mind to us about the things that they think we should change in ourselves or whatever. And we hold tightly to the many things that offend us, that, we maintain that, being sensitive to those things, and don't really want to change that in ourselves. We think it should be others. Everyone else should stop saying what they do to offend us, rather than us becoming less sensitive to their offense. So it says here, I found this an interesting example from Geshe-la, like staying at the foot of craggy boulders, like standing on a really rough terrain where it's very difficult to do. That's the example he used. We do not like to be given advice by other people. It's an uncomfortable situation for us to receive advice from others, right? Sometimes my brother tries to do that with me. And, it's like, I'm his big brother. It's like, don't you dare give me advice, right? That's the inner voice that's going on. Anyway, whatever their behavior is like, that is always difficult for us to go along with, no matter what they're saying, no matter how beneficial it might be for us to listen to that advice. We just always find it difficult to go along with it, or to even hear it sometimes. In addition, at times, a mere tiny condition offends our mind. And not only are we offended, we also hold tightly to the bad thought in order to not forget it. In other words, we have this lingering kind of grudge or resentment towards that person on the basis of how they've harmed us. So we're so sensitive that even the smallest offense makes us, go crazy. So again, each of these, you might not look at it and say, well, oh, I'm not that extreme. but to what extent are you offended? To what extent, or do you find it difficult to go along with the advice other people are giving you? This isn't the advice of necessarily a lama. That's how Geshe-la spelled it out in his commentary. But nonetheless, it can be really hard for us sometimes to take advice from others. So I think I do have some slides here to share for verse 80. No, I don't. Okay, good. We go on to 81 then. So I'll read it here and we'll go to the commentary. Our high-handedness is great, and we consider the holy to be enemies. Due to our attachment being great, we eagerly grasp at the young. This is what it means. We'll get into that in a moment. But the first part, kind of our high-handedness, it's again, we become very kind of haughty and full of ourselves, and we disrespect others, especially even those who are quite holy or superior to us in terms of their spiritual development. And then having great lust, even we could call this, not just attachment. Some people don't have great boundaries around their sexual behavior. And so again, that's what's being spelled out here, is kind of a grasping at the young or at those who are more attractive, more beautiful, what have you. We don't need to go into any commentary on what's happening with regard to one political figure, one congressperson. But nonetheless, we can see that these are really damaging behaviors for people to engage in because they cause harm to others in the midst of these mindsets that people have that are need to be kept in check. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Geshe-la says on this. Again, this is at the bottom of page 33. When others study, practice meditation, explain the Dharma, and so forth without rejoicing and motivated by a high-handed attitude, we mention and talk about their faults. It's kind of interesting, he's talking about it when others are doing this. But the idea here is that it's our high-handedness that's great, Okay, I'm sorry, that's right. I just read it wrong. Okay, so when others are doing these virtuous things, others are engaging in their spiritual practice and so on, without our rejoicing and being motivated by our high-handed attitude, our haughtiness, our being full of ourselves, we mention and talk about their faults. Sorry, I just read that the wrong way. So essentially what Geshe-la is saying here is, again, we are so full of ourselves that even when people who have great qualities are doing these amazing things, we end up putting them down. We end up pointing out their faults. Without respecting holy beings, we consider them to be our enemies and disparage them, he says. Due to our attachment being great, we eagerly grasp at the young, at women, and so forth, at whoever are the objects of our sexual desires, our lust. So again, all of these are faults that arise through the mind of self-cherishing. Again, that first part, I had in my notes here that this can sometimes be referred to as thinking that the best way to lift ourselves up is to put others down, to kind of tear them down. And so in this case where you have others that are doing all these wonderful things and practicing the Dharma and what have you, we talk about their faults so we feel better about ourselves, kind of elevate ourselves to being superior due to our kind of misplaced pride. We don't even really have as many qualities perhaps as these people who are doing all this study and practice, but we want to think that we're better than them. So we bring them down in order to raise ourselves up, which of course is back on the topic of politics, is what our whole political system is often based on. When people run for office, they often don't go out there and talk about their qualities and their actual real, the characteristics they have that will make them good leaders. Rather, they might point out the faults of the other person that they're running against. And that's a way of kind of elevating themselves that is not so skillful and not so beneficial. Then we have the next verse, number 82. Due to being fickle, we turn our backs on former companions. We even saw this idea of being fickle in friendships earlier on. I think it's going to come out on the slides I have, but I think it's like verse 42 or something. Due to our new friendships being great, the fact that we flit from person to person and making all these, delightful new friendships, we make entertaining talk to all. We try to impress them and try to pull them into our circle of influence, where we may end up even abusing them as part of that. But we have to be real careful around friendships. Again, we already talked about that with regard to trust and how important trust is with regard to those that we're so close to that they confide in us or that we confide in them. But here the idea is that we have this flightiness to our friendships that is really not a good thing. Someone who was previously close to our heart is considered to be a companion. When later on that person changes slightly, for instance, his status or her status becomes lower, or when the misery of suffering arises for them, we are fickle in that we turn our back on this former companion without benefiting them even slightly. So again, that might not be the case that that's happened, but we become very, again, fickle in our friendships. We, for whatever reason, we don't want to respect that person any longer. We don't want to, hold them in a dear light. We should do what we can to try to keep good relationships with friends, people, what have you, that are close in our lives. But there may be times where we do have to separate from others, but don't do it in a way that is mean and vindictive. Then it says there that our new friendships are great means that we immediately become friends and companions with others. We don't even think twice about it. We think there's something attractive about them. We immediately go to them and want to perhaps use them. That we make entertaining talk means that without actually benefiting others, we trick them verbally regarding the way in which we have food, wealth, enjoyments, and so forth. This being similar to what is meant in the world as a fast talker. A fast talker is essentially, someone who is continuing to, kind of bring people in, persuade others to do things, kind of be very clever in how we manipulate others through our speech. So again, these are the sorts of traits that we're talking about here in regard to how we are with friends. Do we become very fickle, and do we become an unreliable friend in terms of befriending others that we end up taking advantage of? So yeah, Mary Jo, let's get your question and then we'll go on to the slides. I do have a little more to share, but yeah.
Well, that friendship thing, the same person I mentioned about
Mhm.
our different view. There's something else that where we don't, we agree on almost everything, and she's like a Buddhist, practicing some Buddhism anyway, and but it's really been. I found myself saying, "Well, I guess it's over with this person," and then I thought, I want to work with that because I don't think I just want friends that agree with me. It's a value to have people that do see things other ways, but I really had to work on that to kind of convince myself that I wanted to try to maintain that friendship. And I guess there's a point at which we have to decide to or to not do it. But
Yeah.
anyway, it was interesting to me how just a couple of things, and I was kind of ready to say, well, forget about it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
No, you're doing great work, Mary Jo, because that's
Mhm.
that's good, analysis, looking at it and going, where is that thought coming from? And is it coming from that idea that you said of we like to be in our little bubble of everyone agreeing with us? This is what everyone was pointing out in the last 4 or 5 years with what transpired politically in this country. The liberal bubble and the conservative bubble, and everyone just kind of wanting to be around the things that they enjoy and that they find are complementary to their way of looking at the world. But we need to see how other people look at the world differently. We really need that, or else we're never. I mean, that's where I can appreciate some of what's going on in Washington around wanting to have more bipartisanship. But it means people have to sit down and really understand where people are coming from, rather than being at these polar opposites and never really getting to know what is driving each side of it. And there might need to be some changes, and some people might need to let go of some things that they're holding on to that make it problematic. But I think to just back out of things without doing that investigation is really possibly troublesome. There may be, again, times where we do have to separate from others because we recognize that we really can't do much for them, and perhaps what they're doing for us is actually endangering our spiritual practice. But in most cases, we can actually enlarge our spiritual practice by trying to be with others who are different, who are saying and holding views, different than ours. So, yeah, very good. You're doing good work, Mary Jo. So let's look at what Venerable Thupten Chodron shares. I think I've got some of her slides again. I just like her commentary. Sometimes I've been using it a bit more. First of all, I did share this verse back with when we saw it previously. Again, I think it was around 42. This is from that text I mentioned earlier that I taught for all of you last year, the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland. Be free of flattery and fickleness and friendship. Be steadfast and reliable at all times. This is just the first two lines of that verse, but it's really exactly what's being spelled out here. But recall that Atisha was a student of Dharmarakshita's, so no doubt he was influenced by a lot of what was in this text as well as other teachings he received from him, and it pointed this out. We don't hear this in everyday Dharma. When you go to the Lam Rim, it doesn't tell you, to not be fickle in your friendships. But this is one way that it manifests, is the mind of self-cherishing, wanting something new, something delightful, something more interesting than perhaps what we've had in the past, and maybe even again putting down other people. We want to be a much more reliable friend. Those friendships that we have, we should value greatly, especially Dharma friendships. Don't let Dharma friendships go south. That's really a real dangerous thing, because there again, we should be trying to work with the Dharma within our relationships as much as possible. So the alternate version said, because of fickleness, I cast afar my past relationships. Infatuated with novelty, I talk animatedly with everyone. I like that translation of the second line, because it kind of gives you visions of like people at cocktail parties or something, like wanting to find new, interesting people to talk to, and then just, trying to be the life of the party when you talk to them. So this is how she explains it. When we meet someone new, we are infatuated with novelty and talk animatedly, displaying a great personality to attract others. When people bite the hook, we then use them to make us feel good, especially if they are people of some renown, that, oh, that person's plugged in, they've only got like 1 degree of separation to these movie stars or something, whatever. And when we tire of them and they no longer serve our purposes, we drop them. This inflicts great pain on others, because they may have developed affection for us, thinking that we were one way while we turned out not to be the image we presented. Again, this is a bit of that pretension, putting on airs of being something that we're not. This animated personality that we project forward that is not in line with who we really are. We're just doing it to try to reel that person in and get something out of them. So again, we have to, each of us, look at that and see whether this is a behavior we've engaged in, and then recognize again it comes from the twin demons and want to be free of it. Let's try to do maybe one more verse. Due to lacking clairvoyance, we eagerly lie and deprecate. Due to lacking compassion, we snatch away the heart of those with confidence in us. So let's go to the commentary. Just go straight to that. I won't say much more till after we read that. Commentary on page 34 says, even though we do not have clairvoyance, when others request us to examine something and so forth, we tell lies by pretending to have it. Once more, we're putting on airs here. By the force of that, when later on the falsehood appears, we also have the need to eagerly deprecate others, saying, oh, well, they're liars. They're lying, even if somebody's caught us in our own lie, we will attribute the lie to others. That may sound like something other political figures have done too. So anyway, once more, the job is not to point out the faults in others. The job is always to look at this for ourselves and hold this up as a mirror and say, to what extent am I doing this? Do I put on any airs of having qualities, abilities that are beyond what I actually possess? And do I deprecate others when they point out maybe again that I was doing something false, that I was not living up to how I advertise myself to be? In addition, the second line, if we have compassion, we will never act to harm the minds of those people who have confidence in us. Otherwise, whenever the slightest undesirable thing happens to us, by the force of not having compassion, we will end up doing some kind of harm to that person, whereby we will snatch their heart away. That is, we will make them sad. We will kind of deflate them on the basis of having they entrusted us with this friendship, with this kind of closeness, and we've once more kind of taken advantage of them. Here I do have one little story that I thought was really cute that was shared in a Venerable Tipton children's book. Maybe some of you are already reading that book, but I'm trying to point out some things in there because the last time I taught this, I did have that book, but the first time I didn't. And so I'm finding more and more in it that's really quite nice. So she relates a story. Once the monastics at the abbey, she means Sravasti Abbey up in Washington State, where she and her monastics all live. They were invited to have a table at a New Age fair. On either side of us were psychics. People flocked to the psychics, ignoring us. Here are these nuns, mostly, maybe a few monks that are there at this table at this New Age fair, and there are just crowds at the psychics, right? They would sit gazing with devotion and interest at the psychics who told them this and that about their lives and gave them advice. While the Buddha is the infallible guide who can lead us to lasting happiness, people were much more interested in the psychics who discussed their life, their wealth, their love life, and so on. So she's just kind of pointing out again that she's not necessarily saying these psychics are charlatans and are pretending to have clairvoyances and whatever that they don't have, but just nonetheless how this is something we too might become enthralled by and maybe advertise ourselves as having some sort of great supernormal abilities, and we don't possess them. So we have to be real careful once more that we don't give false impressions about our abilities to others, even in the slightest way. We don't have to go around, professing to be a psychic or to read others' minds or tell them their past lives or whatever the case might be. But we should be as honest and forthright with others as we can. His Holiness, once more, is the perfect example of this, right? Because even when he talks about spiritual realizations, he's always like, oh, I've meditated on bodhicitta a little. I have some feeling for it, or, oh, I kind of understand emptiness a bit. I've spent some time investigating it, but never really says anything that is professing to have any great realizations or abilities. So once more, we should be really clear with the people that are in our circle of friends and not put on airs and kind of mislead them, and then of course certainly not take advantage of them. All right, so we made it up through 83, which is pretty good. We made like 11 verses tonight. I'm feeling very confident we'll make it through by the end of my time teaching this month. I'll be working with Eloise on some things, but anyway, I'll be in touch with her. But I think we've got 3 more classes yet this month, so I think we'll be able to get through the remainder of this text. So if you do want to, again, read ahead, you're always welcome to do that. In terms of any of the commentaries that are on your reading list, you can do that, or even just looking over Geshe-la's commentary. I may move through the last, 7 of these that we have that get us up through verse 90, and then we'll finish off this section definitely in the next one, and then hopefully go on to Ultimate Bodhicitta that we'll cover over the last 2 classes probably. So any questions, comments, criticisms? I always throw that out there. I need criticisms. Everyone criticize me, please. I get too attached to praise. Anyway, nothing? Okay. All right. So also, as I always have said, try to look over these verses in the next few days if you can, to kind of see what verses you might want to reflect on further and see, oh, I have that trait to some extent, and be willing to kind of admit that to yourself. You don't have to admit it to me or anyone else, but then be willing to kind of take a look at that and see if you can figure out how the mind of self-cherishing and self-grasping are playing a role in that, and then try to create the opposite mind, the mind of cherishing others. Try to see, how emptiness, lacking this inherently existent I, how that could be brought to bear to help undermine those states of mind that are negative. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and do our prayers then.